The Springfield Song. The Springfield M1 Tyno 3 lay across Private Tommy Chen's knees like a relic from another war, its worn wooden stock bearing the scratches and oil stains of 20 years in his father's hands. The other prisoners in Compound 7 had stopped their quiet evening conversations to stare at the rifle with barely concealed disdain. Staff Sergeant Williams spat into the dust of the barracks floor and shook his head slowly. "Kid, that thing belongs in a museum, not a foxhole," Williams muttered, his voice carrying the authority of a man who'd survived Guadalcanal before being captured on Luzon. "Your old man's war rifle ain't gonna do squat against Japs with Type 99s and machine gun nests." The other men nodded in agreement. Chen had been carrying his father's Springfield since enlisting, against all regulations and common sense. While every other soldier in the Pacific carried the semi-automatic M1 Garand with its 8-round clip and distinctive ping, Chen clung to the bolt-action rifle that had served his immigrant father in the trenches of France 25 years earlier. The weapon looked ancient compared to modern war machinery, its long barrel and manual action marking it as obsolete technology from a bygone era. Chen said nothing, as he usually did when the mockery began. He simply continued cleaning the rifle with methodical precision, working oil into every component with the reverence his father had taught him as a boy in San Francisco's Chinatown. The old Chinese immigrant had spoken little English, but he'd communicated clearly enough about the rifle's capabilities through patient demonstration and broken phrases about one shot, one kill, and patience, like hunting deer in mountains. The humid Philippine air hung thick around the bamboo barracks of Compound 7, carrying the scent of rotting vegetation and distant wood smoke. Dawn came early here, breaking through the jungle canopy in shafts of golden light that revealed the watchtowers and razor wire that defined their world. Chen had watched that same sunrise for 8 months now, counting the days since their transport had been shot down over Luzon, and the survivors marched through the jungle to this place. The Japanese guards had allowed Chen to keep the rifle as a cruel joke. Colonel Yamamoto, the camp commandant, had personally inspected the weapon and laughed at what he called American soldier's antique. The guards found endless amusement in the fact that this Chinese-American boy carried his dead father's rifle like some kind of talisman. They didn't understand that the weapon represented the only connection Chen had to his heritage and his family, both lost in the chaos of war. What none of them understood, neither the American prisoners nor the Japanese guards, was that Sergeant Chen Liu had been one of the finest marksmen in the American Expeditionary Forces during the Great War. The Springfield in Tommy's hands wasn't just an old rifle. It was a precision instrument that had accounted for 37 confirmed German kills in the Argonne Forest, each shot carefully recorded in a small notebook that Tommy still carried in his breast pocket. The notebook contained more than just kill tallies. In careful Chinese characters, his father had recorded wind patterns, elevation adjustments, and the subtle art of reading terrain. Tommy couldn't read all the Chinese, but he'd absorbed the lessons through hours of patient instruction in the hills above San Francisco Bay, where his father had taught him to see the world through a sniper's eyes. Williams stood and stretched, his joints creaking audibly in the morning quiet. The staff sergeant had been a good soldier once, confident in American superiority and the righteousness of their cause. 8 months of captivity had worn him down to bitter resignation, though he still maintained the facade of military discipline among the men. "Roll call in 10 minutes, Williams announced to the barracks. "Chen, maybe today you can ask the guards if they need that rifle for a doorstop." The other prisoners chuckled, but the sound carried no real humor. They'd all learned to find small cruelties amusing when larger ones surrounded them daily. Chen felt the familiar weight of isolation settle over him, the sense of belonging neither to the American soldiers, who saw him as different, nor to the Chinese heritage he only partially understood. As the men filed out for morning assembly, Chen carefully wrapped the Springfield in its canvas cover. Through the bamboo slats, he could see the jungle pressing close against the compound's perimeter. Somewhere beyond those trees lay freedom or death or something between the two. But escape wasn't what occupied his thoughts as he joined the formation in the central yard. Instead, he thought of his father's words, spoken in halting English during their last conversation before Chen shipped out, "War changes everything, Tommy, but some things, they change you back." Unte, if stories like this make you question what you'd do in someone else's boots, tell us in the comments how you imagine you'd react in this camp, and stay with us for the next chapters. The mockery reached its peak on a sweltering Tuesday morning in August 1943, when word spread through the compound that Japanese reinforcements were moving through the jungle beyond the perimeter. Intelligence gathered from friendly Filipino contacts indicated that a full company of elite troops was establishing hidden positions in the dense vegetation surrounding the camp, preparing for what appeared to be either a major prisoner transfer or an execution detail. Chen heard the news while working the vegetable garden detail, a strip of cleared ground near the eastern fence where the prisoners grew sweet potatoes and cabbage under the supervision of guard Tanaka. The young Japanese soldier had been assigned to the camp only a month ago, replacing an older guard who'd been transferred to the fighting in the Solomons. Tanaka spoke broken English and seemed perpetually nervous, jumping at sudden sounds and chain-smoking cigarettes that smelled of harsh tobacco. "Many soldiers come," Tanaka said quietly as Chen worked the soil with a wooden hoe. "Elite unit. They make camp. Invisible." The guard glanced around nervously before continuing. "My captain, he say this place become very secure soon. Maybe prisoners go different place." Chen kept hoeing, but his father's training kicked in automatically. He began cataloguing details, wind direction, sight lines from the jungle, the nervous energy radiating from Tanaka. Something was building toward a crisis, and the traditional military wisdom would be useless against it. That afternoon, Captain Morrison, the senior Allied prisoner, called Chen aside after the morning rice distribution. The captain's uniform hung loose on his diminished frame, but his eyes still held the sharp calculation of a professional soldier analyzing an impossible situation. "Chen, I know the men give you grief about that rifle, but here's the truth," Morrison said quietly, glancing toward the bamboo fence where Japanese sentries maintained their lazy patrol. "If things go sideways with these new troops moving in, we might need every advantage we can get. Your father's weapon, can it really perform like the old-timers claim?" Chen nodded slowly, his calloused fingers tracing the familiar contours of the Springfield's receiver. He'd been waiting 2 years for someone to ask that question seriously, without the usual condescension or amusement. The rifle could reach targets at ranges that made the Garand look like a close-quarters weapon, and its ammunition could penetrate cover that would stop the lighter rounds favored by modern military doctrine. "My father taught me to hunt deer in the mountains above San Francisco," Chen said carefully. "Different kind of hunting than most soldiers learn. Patience hunting, one-shot hunting." Morrison studied him with new interest. The captain had commanded an artillery battery before capture, used to thinking in terms of massed firepower and overwhelming force. But their situation called for subtler approaches. "What kind of range are we talking about?" 500 yards, maybe more with the right conditions. My father, he could hit a playing card at that distance." The captain whistled softly. In the barracks that evening, Chen could feel the subtle shift in how the other prisoners regarded him. Word of Morrison's conversation had spread, carrying with it the first hint that the Chinese-American with his antique rifle might represent something more than comic relief. Williams approached Chen's bunk after lights out, speaking in whispers that wouldn't carry to the guard station. "I've been thinking about what the captain said. You really think you could hit something at long range with that old thing?" Chen touched the canvas-wrapped rifle beside his bunk. "My father served in the Argonne Forest. 37 confirmed kills with this rifle, everyone recorded in his notebook. He pulled out the small journal, its pages yellow with age and filled with Chinese characters interspersed with English words: range, wind, target. These are his notes. Wind patterns, elevation tables, everything a sniper needs to know. Williams studied the notebook by the faint light filtering through the bamboo walls. For the first time since Chen had known him, the staff sergeant's expression held something other than skepticism. Jesus, Chen, your old man was the real deal. In the distance, beyond the jungle canopy, the prisoners could hear the sound of vehicles moving through the night. The reinforcements Tanaka had mentioned were taking their positions, preparing for something the camp's current guards hadn't bothered to explain. Chen lay awake listening to the sounds, mentally mapping the likely locations based on engine noise and the brief glimpses of light that filtered through the trees. His father had taught him to read the jungle, to see the patterns that revealed human presence even when humans tried to remain hidden. Tomorrow, Chen decided, he would begin putting those lessons to use. How long can a man carry two conflicting truths without breaking? The opportunity came 36 hours later, when the hidden Japanese positions revealed themselves in the worst possible way. At dawn on Thursday, machine gun fire erupted from concealed bunkers scattered throughout the jungle canopy, cutting down 3 Filipino resistance fighters who'd been attempting to deliver medical supplies to the prison camp. The bodies lay in the open ground between the tree line and the compound, a clear message about the consequences of cooperation with Allied forces. Chen watched from the mess hall window as the prisoners gathered for their morning assembly. The 3 dead Filipinos had been young, perhaps teenagers, and they died carrying bandages and medicine stolen from a Japanese field hospital 20 miles away. Their sacrifice had been for nothing, the medical supplies scattered in the mud, their blood seeping into Philippine soil that had already drunk too much. Colonel Yamamoto assembled the prisoners in the central courtyard and announced through his interpreter that the terrorists had been eliminated by invisible soldiers of the Emperor. Any further attempts at outside contact would result in the execution of 10 prisoners for every dead Japanese soldier. The implication was clear. The jungle around them now belonged entirely to enemy forces, and escape or rescue had become impossible. But what Yamamoto didn't announce was something Chen had overheard from guard Tanaka the previous evening. The hidden Japanese positions represented a sophisticated defensive network designed to make the camp absolutely secure before a planned mass execution scheduled for the following week. Intelligence later revealed that the 30 soldiers comprising this special unit had been handpicked for their expertise in camouflaged warfare and long-range observation. Chen studied the jungle methodically over the next 24 hours, using techniques his father had taught him for reading terrain and identifying unnatural patterns in vegetation. The old man had learned these skills hunting in the mountains of Guangdong province before immigrating to America, and he'd refined them further during months of trench warfare where spotting enemy snipers meant the difference between life and death. From his father's notebook, Chen had memorized the signs: vegetation that grew too uniformly, shadows that appeared and disappeared with unnatural regularity, the barely perceptible glint of metal that suggested optical equipment. The Japanese soldiers were expertly concealed, but they'd made the mistake of assuming that no one in the prison camp possessed the patience and skill necessary to conduct proper counter-surveillance. By Friday evening, Chen had identified 8 probable positions based on subtle disturbances in the jungle canopy, unusual shadows that appeared and disappeared with the movement of the sun, and the barely perceptible glint of metal that suggested optical equipment or weapon barrels. He sketched rough maps in the margins of his father's notebook, using the Chinese characters he'd learned to mark distances and fields of fire. Williams found him that evening, sitting on his bunk with the Springfield partially disassembled for cleaning. "You've been watching the tree line all day," the staff sergeant observed. See anything useful? Chen nodded toward his sketches. 8 positions, maybe 9. Machine gun nests in the big trees, observers in the smaller ones. They're good, but they're not invisible. Could you hit them? Chen ran his fingers along the Springfield's barrel, feeling the subtle imperfections that his father had learned to compensate for over years of use. Range is long, 400 to 500 yards for most positions. Wind patterns change throughout the day because of the jungle canopy. That's not what I asked. Chen met William's eyes directly. My father could hit them. This rifle could hit them. Whether I can... That depends on how well he taught me. Williams was quiet for a long moment. Around them, the other prisoners maintained their evening routines, mending clothes, writing letters that might never be sent, playing quiet card games with decks made from cardboard. The normalcy felt fragile, like a soap bubble that could burst at any moment. Morrison thinks they're planning something big, William said finally. The extra guards, the defensive positions, the way the commandant's been acting. Maybe an execution, maybe just a show of force, but if you could take out those positions, it would change the tactical situation, Chen agreed. But it would also make me a target, and anyone who helped me. Sometimes a man has to choose between being a target and being a victim. That night, Chen lay awake thinking about choice and consequence. His father had never spoken much about his experiences in France, but the notebook contained more than technical notes. Between the range calculations and wind tables, Chen had found brief entries in Chinese. Today, I became someone else. The man I was before the war would not recognize the man I am now. Some bridges cannot be uncrossed. Tomorrow would bring its own test of who Tommy Chen had become and who he was willing to become. Do you think you'd cling to what you were taught back home, or to what your own eyes see in a place like this? Comment which side you'd lean toward, and share this episode with someone who loves real human stories from history. What would you remember more, hunger or kindness? The Springfield's first shot came at 6:17 on Saturday morning, just as the hidden Japanese positions were changing guards under cover of dawn shadows. Chen had positioned himself in the camp's makeshift latrine, using a carefully enlarged gap in the bamboo wall to establish a clear field of fire toward the largest tree in the northeastern sector. The rifle's report echoed across the compound like thunder, and 200 yards away, a Japanese sniper tumbled from his concealed platform 30 feet above the jungle floor. The camp erupted in chaos. Japanese guards ran toward the fence, screaming orders and threats, while prisoners threw themselves flat against the ground to avoid the crossfire that everyone assumed would follow. But Chen had already moved, carrying the Springfield to a different position near the camp's southern boundary, where he'd spotted the muzzle flash of an enemy machine gun the previous day. His second shot, fired at 6:23, silenced the machine gun permanently. The bullet traveled nearly 300 yards before finding its target, a distance that should have been impossible for accurate fire under combat conditions. But the Springfield had been designed for precisely this kind of precision shooting, and Chen's father had spent countless hours teaching him to compensate for wind, elevation, and target movement. In the camp's medical station, Dr. Watanabe heard the rifle shots and immediately began preparing for casualties. The Japanese medical officer had been assigned to the camp 3 months earlier after his predecessor died of malaria. Unlike many of his colleagues, Watanabe still believed in the Hippocratic Oath, even in the middle of a war zone. He'd quietly treated injured Filipino villagers when he could, always aware that discovery would mean court-martial and probable execution. The doctor had noticed Chen during the previous weeks, watching the young Chinese-American clean his antique rifle with obvious expertise. Watanabe's own father had been a hunter in the mountains of Honshu, and he recognized the careful movements of someone trained in precision marksmanship. When the first shot rang out, followed quickly by the second, Watanabe understood immediately what was happening. "Nurse, prepare bandages and antiseptic," he told his Filipino assistant quietly. And close the shutters. We may have a long morning ahead of us. Chen's methodical elimination of the concealed positions had begun as a tactical necessity, but quickly became something more personal. Each shot required him to become more fully the person his father had trained him to be, channeling decades of accumulated knowledge and skill into single moments of perfect focus. The Springfield felt alive in his hands, responsive to minute adjustments in grip and breathing that his conscious mind barely registered. His third and fourth kills came within minutes of each other Saturday afternoon, when two Japanese soldiers attempted to establish a new observation post in a cluster of bamboo near the camp's eastern gate. Chen had anticipated their movement, having observed the gap in their surveillance coverage that the new position would fill. His patience paid off when they revealed themselves just long enough for the Springfield to find them. From the guard tower, Sergeant Ishida watched the systematic destruction of his carefully planned defensive network with growing amazement and rage. The elite soldiers under his command were among the Imperial Army's finest jungle fighters, trained in camouflage techniques that had proven effective against American forces throughout the Pacific. Yet somehow, a single enemy sniper was picking them off one by one with an antiquated rifle that belonged in a museum. Ishida had initially dismissed the American prisoners as defeated men, broken by captivity and reduced to simple survival. The idea that one of them possessed the skill and determination to conduct effective counter-sniper operations challenged everything he'd been taught about American fighting capability. The psychological impact was as devastating as the tactical losses. Chen's fifth shot, fired just before sunset, eliminated a sniper who'd been targeting the camp's medical station from a position nearly 400 yards away. The bullet's trajectory took it through 2 layers of jungle canopy before finding its mark, a shot that required perfect calculation of wind drift and vegetation deflection. When the enemy sniper's rifle clattered to the ground far below his tree platform, even the skeptical American prisoners began to understand what they were witnessing. Williams found Chen that evening as he cleaned the Springfield by lamplight, his movements automatic and precise. 5 shots, 5 kills, the staff sergeant said quietly. Your father taught you well. Chen looked up from the rifle's receiver, his eyes reflecting something harder than the young man Williams had known for 8 months. My father taught me to hunt deer, Chen replied. This is different. How so? Deer don't shoot back. Deer don't have families waiting for them to come home. Williams studied Chen's face in the flickering light. The transformation was subtle, but undeniable. The same features, but arranged around a different kind of awareness. The war had found Tommy Chen at last, reshaping him in ways that basic training and months of captivity had not. Regrets? Chen reassembled the rifle's bolt mechanism with practiced efficiency. My father's notebook has an entry from October 1918. He wrote, Today I learned that killing and murder are different things, but the difference matters less than you think it will. Outside, the jungle had fallen silent except for the natural sounds of insects and night birds. The hidden Japanese positions that remained were maintaining strict noise discipline, their occupants understanding that they were now the hunted rather than the hunters. Tomorrow would bring the next phase of a deadly chess match that none of them had expected to play. If you came home with this story, who would you dare to tell? Over the next 36 hours, the hunt became a deadly chess match between one man with an obsolete rifle and 10 of the Imperial Army's most skilled jungle fighters. Chen moved constantly around the camp's perimeter, using buildings, latrines, and supply sheds to mask his position while systematically eliminating threats that had been invisible to everyone else. Sunday brought 3 more kills as Chen continued his methodical elimination of the concealed positions. His 8th shot dropped a Japanese forward observer who'd been directing potential artillery strikes against the camp. His 9th eliminated a communications specialist who'd been coordinating movements between the scattered units. The Japanese commanders were forced to acknowledge that their invisible soldiers were being hunted by someone who understood their tactics and could match their fieldcraft. Radio intercepts later revealed growing panic among the hidden units, as soldiers who'd considered themselves undetectable found themselves exposed and vulnerable to an enemy they couldn't locate or identify. Dr. Watanabe had been treating minor injuries throughout the weekend, cuts from hasty movement through the jungle, sprains from soldiers diving for cover, the psychological strain of being hunted by an unseen enemy. But late Sunday evening, he received an unexpected visitor. Chen appeared at the medical station after dark, carrying his father's notebook and wearing an expression of profound exhaustion. "Doctor," Chen said quietly in careful Japanese, having learned the language during his months of captivity. "I need to understand something." Watanabe gestured for Chen to sit on one of the medical cots. The young Chinese-American looked hollowed out, as if the past 2 days had aged him years. "What troubles you, Chen-san?" Chen opened his father's notebook to a page near the back, where the Chinese characters were interspersed with English words and dates. "My father wrote something here I never understood before. He said that after his 37th kill, he couldn't remember the faces of the first 36. Watanabe studied the notebook carefully. His own father had fought in the Russo-Japanese War and had spoken of similar experiences, the gradual numbing that came with repeated killing, the way human beings adapted to situations that should have been unbearable. "Your father was protecting himself," Watanabe said gently. "The mind has ways of enduring what it must endure. I've killed 9 men in 2 days, Chen continued. I can remember all their faces. I can remember exactly where each shot hit, how they fell, the sound they made. Does that make me better or worse than my father?" Before Watanabe could answer, Chen pulled a small object from his pocket, a photograph of a young Japanese soldier, perhaps 19 years old, smiling beside an older man who might have been his father. It had fallen from the pocket of one of Chen's victims. This was in his uniform pocket. He was someone's son, someone's hope for the future. And I ended that with a piece of metal fired from 400 yards away. Watanabe examined the photograph, recognizing the boy as Private Yamashita, who'd been assigned to the special unit only the week before. The older man in the photo wore the uniform of a school teacher. Yamashita had mentioned that his father taught mathematics in a village near Kyoto. "War makes killers of us all, Chen-san. The question is whether we remain human while we do what we must do." Chen took back the photograph and studied it for a long moment. "My father's notebook has 37 entries. Each one includes the date, the range, the conditions, and the name of the target, when he could learn it. He made himself remember them all. The final shot came at 6:42 on Monday morning, exactly 36 hours after the hunt began." Chen had identified the location of the Japanese unit commander based on radio traffic patterns and the subtle movements of subordinate soldiers. The man had established his command post in what appeared to be an impenetrable thicket nearly 500 yards from the camp, protected by multiple layers of camouflage and natural cover. Chen's preparation for this shot was different from the others. He spent 20 minutes studying wind patterns, consulting his father's notes about extreme-range shooting, and calculating the trajectory through multiple layers of vegetation. When he finally squeezed the trigger, the Springfield's bullet traveled through morning mist and jungle shadows to find its target with the precision that had made the rifle legendary among American snipers of the previous generation. The Japanese commander's death effectively ended organized resistance from the hidden positions, as the surviving soldiers abandoned their posts rather than face continued elimination by an enemy they couldn't see or counter. But for Chen, the moment brought no satisfaction, only the weight of his father's legacy and the knowledge that he had now traveled a path from which there was no return. In his notebook that evening, Chen made his 10th entry in careful Chinese characters, recording the range, conditions, and target details, just as his father had done 25 years earlier. At the bottom of the page, he wrote in English, "Today I understood what my father tried to teach me about the difference between killing and murder. The difference matters more than I thought it would. Ibiu, what does it mean to inherit not just a weapon, but the weight of its history?" Colonel Yamamoto's reaction revealed the psychological impact of Chen's 36-hour campaign. The Japanese commandant, who'd previously treated the prisoners with casual contempt, now regarded them with obvious wariness and respect. The myth of Japanese tactical superiority had been shattered by one man, with his father's rifle, demonstrating that American fighting capabilities had been consistently underestimated. The other prisoners' attitude toward Chen and his Springfield underwent an equally dramatic transformation. Staff Sergeant Williams publicly apologized for his previous mockery, acknowledging that he'd failed to recognize the difference between modern mass-production military equipment and a precision instrument crafted for individual marksmanship. The rifle that had seemed obsolete now represented a level of personal military capability that transcended standard tactical doctrine. More importantly, Chen's success had eliminated the immediate threat of mass execution while demonstrating to local resistance forces that the camp remained viable for future rescue operations. The hidden Japanese positions had been intended to make outside assistance impossible, but their systematic elimination reopened communication channels with Filipino guerrilla units operating in the surrounding territory. Dr. Watanabe approached Chen 3 days later, carrying a small wooden box and wearing an expression of conflicted duty. The medical officer had been wrestling with his own conscience since the sniper campaign ended, torn between loyalty to his emperor and respect for Chen's demonstration of warrior honor. "Chen-san, I have something that belongs to you," Watanabe said quietly, glancing around to ensure they weren't observed. Inside the box were 10 small personal items: photographs, letters, prayer beads, a carved wooden figure of a cat. Each item had been taken from the pockets of Chen's victims, carefully preserved by Watanabe as a gesture toward their humanity. "In my country, we believe the spirits of the honored dead should not be forgotten," Watanabe explained. "These men died as warriors. They deserve to be remembered as men." Chen studied each item carefully, handling them with the same reverence he showed his father's rifle. A letter written in careful script to someone named Akiko. A photograph of an elderly couple standing beside a small farmhouse. Prayer beads worn smooth by countless repetitions of the same sacred words. "Why are you giving these to me?" "Because you are the one who sent them to their ancestors. In our tradition, that makes you responsible for honoring their memory." The psychological impact extended beyond immediate tactical considerations. Chen had proven that individual skill and determination could overcome technological disadvantage and numerical superiority. His father's rifle, dismissed as an antique by both enemies and allies, had accomplished what modern weapons and conventional tactics could not achieve. In the weeks that followed, word of Chen's achievements spread throughout the Allied prisoner network, carried by guards who transferred between camps and by new arrivals who brought stories from other compounds. The Chinese-American soldier with his father's rifle became a symbol of resistance and capability that transcended racial and cultural barriers within the prisoner community. Liberation came 4 months later, when American forces finally reached the compound and freed the surviving prisoners. Chen carried his father's Springfield throughout the remainder of the war, earning recognition as one of the Pacific Theater's most effective snipers and training other soldiers in the precision shooting techniques his immigrant father had passed down from another generation's conflicts. But the war's end brought its own complications. Chen returned to San Francisco, carrying not just his father's rifle, but also the wooden box of personal items from the 10 men he'd killed. His family's Chinatown apartment felt impossibly small after 2 years of captivity and combat, filled with people who wanted to celebrate his homecoming without understanding what he'd experienced. "Tell us about the camp," his sister asked over dinner the first night back. "Was it terrible? Were they cruel to you?" Chen touched the small wooden box in his jacket pocket, feeling the weight of 10 lives reduced to fragments of memory and meaning. "It was complicated," he said finally. "More complicated than anyone wants to hear." His brother-in-law leaned forward eagerly. "But you showed them, right? Showed them what Americans can do when we put our minds to it?" Chen excused himself from the table and walked out onto the fire escape overlooking Grant Avenue. The sounds of Chinatown evening business, vendors calling out prices, children playing in the street, old men arguing over mahjong, felt like echoes from someone else's life. After the war, Chen returned to San Francisco and carefully stored the Springfield in the same wooden case his father had used. He never spoke publicly about the 36 hours that had saved his fellow prisoners, preferring to honor his father's memory through quiet service rather than public recognition. He found work at a camera shop in Chinatown, using the patience and precision his father had taught him to repair delicate mechanisms and capture moments that would outlast the people who created them. Sometimes customers would ask about the small shrine in the back room, 10 photographs arranged around burning incense with names written in both Japanese and English characters. "Family?" they would ask. "In a way," Chen would reply and change the subject. "The rifle remains in his family, passed down to a son who understands its history and significance." Sometimes, when modern military analysts discuss the evolution of sniper doctrine and precision shooting, they refer to cases like Chen's as examples of how individual capability can transcend technological limitations. But they rarely mention the deeper truth that some weapons carry more than mechanical precision. They carry the accumulated wisdom and determination of the hands that shaped them. In his final years, Chen would sometimes take his son to the hills above San Francisco Bay, where his own father had taught him to shoot. The Springfield would emerge from its case, still meticulously maintained, still capable of the precision that had saved a camp full of prisoners and ended 10 lives. "What did great-grandfather teach you?" his son would ask. "That every shot matters," Chen would reply, loading a single cartridge and sighting on a distant target, "and that remembering matters more than forgetting." The echo of that first shot would carry across the hills, fading into the wind that blew in from the Pacific, carrying with it the weight of memory and the promise that some stories once begun never truly end. If this story reminded you that even in the darkest times, small acts of humanity still matter, subscribe to the channel, tell us which country you watch from, and invite someone to revisit history with us in the next story.